and serve a term of life without parole. As to count 4,
this is the result. This is where you will end up, with your family and friends crying as you're let out of the courtroom to serve the rest of your life in prison.
Yep, that was the reaction of a deadly gang member after receiving a life sentence for his heinous crimes. And if you thought that was disturbing, then wait till you see these other 9 gang members reacting to their life sentences. Number 10. Gangster Disciples Street Gang.
It has been described as the most vicious murder in recent history here locally. 8 gang members brutally beat, tortured, and killed a man once they found out he spoke with police.
October 17th, 2016. 5 ATL members of the Gangster Disciples sodomized and murdered 33-year-old Christopher Dean after finding out he used to be a police informant. The Gangster Disciples is a small criminal group that started in Chicago back in the 70s. After 2 other gangs, the Black Disciples and Supreme Gangsters, combined forces. They're now active in at least 24 states across the U.S., including Georgia, where these men committed one of the most disturbing murders in recent history. The 5 men, Christopher Lockett, Xavier Gibson, Quatez Clark, Joshua Rooks, and Jasper Green, orchestrated the murder of Dean to serve as a warning to other members of their gang. One of the men, Lockett, invited Dean to a house in Atlanta to complete a drug purchase. But when Dean got there, Lockett and his fellow gangbangers launched an all-out onslaught on Dean, battering him with 2x4s and a crowbar. They then sexually assaulted him by sodomizing his body before fatally shooting him in the back of the head and squashing his skull with their feet, one after the other. Lockett then ordered Jasper Green and Lamar Allman to clean up the gruesome scene and burn Dean's body along with his car. But the body was in such a grisly condition that they instead dumped the corpse in the trunk of his car and left the vehicle in the parking lot of the Hamilton E. Holmes subway station. This is where the police found his body and used the DNA on his corpse to trace all the men involved. 3 years later, a Supreme Court found all those 5 men guilty and sentenced them to life imprisonment. However, neither one of them apologized or seemed to be fazed by the verdict. Number 9. Aiden Fui.
I would submit that this case is probably the most difficult and shocking case that this county in St. Johns County has dealt with.
That right there was the emotionless reaction of 14-year-old Aiden Fui as he was handed a life sentence for the murder of a high school cheerleader, Tristan Bailey. Aiden isn't a gang member, but his crime was sinister enough to earn him a place on our list. May 9th, 2021. The body of Bailey was discovered hours after the teenager was reported missing by her family, and what shocked everyone was how Fui dehumanized her before her death. Tristan Bailey was one of 5 children of Stacy and Forrest Bailey. She lived in Durbin Crossing in northeast St. Johns County and was a student and cheerleader at Patriot Oaks Academy. Also at this academy was Aiden Fui, who, according to reports, lived in the same neighborhood as Bailey. Now, these two were not friends. However, Bailey was a victim of Fui's ridiculous obsession. During the court hearing, Aiden's girlfriend, whose name was concealed for her protection, testified to the fact that Aiden had an insane obsession with killing. She said Fui talked about killing people frequently, and also said that within a month before Bailey's killing, he revealed to her his plans to murder someone by dragging him into the woods and stabbing him. He would take his knife out and pretend to stab me with it. Aiden would draw graphic pictures depicting mutilated bodies. He heard voices when he was angry and would threaten to kill people. He knew something was wrong with him and wanted to reach out for help. Sadly, before Aiden could get the help he needed, the voices in his head led him down the path of no return. May 9th, 2021. Aiden asked one of his friends for Bailey's phone number. When he got it, he convinced her to meet him at a friend's house. Then surveillance footage showed the two of them walking down the street where her body was eventually found. An hour and 45 minutes later, the same video showed Fui heading back, alone, carrying his shoes. After her parents reported her missing, her body was found with a devastating 114 stab wounds, with 45 of them indicating Bailey was trying to fight him off. Now just imagine the pain she must have felt struggling to survive. During the search for the missing Bailey, an investigator noticed a Snapchat message by Fui, showing him in the backseat of a patrol car taking a selfie and holding up a peace sign. The message said, "Hey guys, has anybody seen Tristan lately?" One of the responses read, "You were with her, Aiden, you know what happened to her." This made Aiden a prime suspect in her murder. Aiden was then arrested on a charge of second-degree murder after the weapon used was identified to be his, and the clothes he wore that day had her DNA all over it. Although he showed emotionless reactions during his sentencing, he did put his head down a few times, seemingly having regret for those actions. And despite his young age, Aiden was trialed as an adult and would be spending the rest of his days behind bars.
Mr. Fucci, having entered a plea of guilty to the crime of first-degree murder, I adjudicate you guilty of the premeditated first-degree murder of Tristan Bailey. I sentence you to life in prison.
Number 8. Jal Smith Riley.
First at noon, life in prison without the possibility of parole. A judge handing down that sentence today to a man who admitted to killing a young woman and badly injuring her boyfriend in 2013.
October 19, 2016. Jaleel was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole for a botched robbery back in 2016. The couple, Portia Brooks and her boyfriend, Aaron Martin, were shot during an attempted robbery by Jaleel on Carthage Avenue in November 2013. Now, it wasn't clear whether or not Jaleel was in a gang, but unofficial sources claim he was, given he was part of the three-man team who attempted to eliminate the couple. The said couple were seated in their car that night when Jaleel and his accomplices approached their vehicle and knocked on their window with a handgun. Then, once the man, Aaron Martin, stepped out of the passenger side, Jaleel went through his pockets and then shot him in the head, but Martin survived. Jaleel leaned further into the vehicle, firing 2 shots at Brooks while she sat, leading to her death at the hospital 3 days later. Jaleel was arrested a few days later, and after almost 3 years on trial, he finally confessed to the killing in August 2016. The other 2 men with him that night also got poetic justice. One of them, Randall Bird III, was killed in a September 2015 shooting near Muskegon, Michigan. The other, 23-year-old Josiah Faust, is serving jail time in Michigan for another criminal charge. Before the judge presiding over the case handed his sentence, he allowed members of Brooks's family to address the court. Her mother, Sharon Brooks, brought her ashes to court and said this:
"He ruined my life. He not only killed her, but he killed me, mentally and emotionally. He killed my identity as a mother of 3. We're left with nothing, and that's because of him."
Her words melted the hearts of everyone present, including Jaleel himself. He also tried changing his plea to not guilty, but the judge did not allow that. Finally, the moment his sentence was read out, Jaleel burst into tears once again and fell to the ground.
Our defendant serve a term of life without parole. As to count 4.
And like we said, Martin survived the shot to the head by a miracle, but he suffered permanent mental injuries. He didn't get to speak during Jaleel's hearing, but afterward, he talked about his dream to become a firefighter, which he cannot accomplish anymore. Number 7. Lil Tony Smack.
Today, a judge sentenced 2 men charged with murdering this boy to life in prison.
The 2 men were members of the notorious 8 Trey Gangster Crips, and they committed a crime that shook the entire state of North Carolina. And no, I'm not just saying that to get you hyped. Their murder case was all over the news because one of the men, Antonio Nathaniel Davenport Jr., aka Lil Tony, was a known rapper around that state. And even in the lyrics of Lil Tony's songs, he glorified the affairs of the gang and displayed graphic scenes in his music videos. Both men were also involved in trafficking drugs, committing bank fraud, and intimidating members of their community. However, their luck ran out when they committed one of the worst crimes against humanity. August 14th, 2019. Rival gang members assaulted Lil Tony along a street in Durham. They then posted a video of the assault online, taunting him and his entire gang in the process. This was seen as a stain on their reputation, and they wanted nothing more than to get their revenge. So Lil Tony conspired with Derek Dixon, aka Smack, alongside other gang members, to run a drive-by on the people who attacked him. After engaging in an online battle with his rivals, Lil Tony, Smack, and their affiliates drove to an area in North Durham, which they knew to be frequented by these rival gang members. Lil Tony was armed with a 9mm, while Smack was kicking to blast some heads off with his .40 caliber. They sat themselves in a van and patiently waited for the perfect moment to run that drive-by. Around the same time, Zion was in his aunt's car with 4 other children, on their way to get snow cones. Sadly, at the exact moment they drove out to carry out their plan, Lil Tony and Smack Smack misidentified Zion's aunt's car as that of the rival gang member and collectively pumped 22 rounds into the car, killing Zion, who was seated in the passenger seat, and hitting his cousin in the arm. Now, the insane part of that story is that Lil Tony was wearing a court-ordered ankle monitor because of a domestic violence charge pending. Can you believe this guy? How dumb can you be to commit a murder wearing a freaking ankle monitor? The location data from his monitor showed he was at the murder scene, as well as Smack's house minutes before the murder. A surveillance camera at a middle school also captured the moment Lil Tony's Honda trailed the SUV Zion was in. It was obvious these two were involved in the crime, and they were arrested a few days later. May 11th, 2021. Smack pled guilty to the charges against him, while Tony was found guilty of the murder by a jury. During their court proceedings, Smack appeared to be sorry for his actions. Lil Tony, on the other hand, looked like he didn't care. During one of the court hearings, he spat at a worker and had to be taken out of that courtroom. But at the end of the day, these two were handed a life sentence. Number 6. The Carpio Brothers. Just as we've seen with other gangsters, these two gang members, known as the Carpio Brothers, sat and looked emotionless as that judge sentenced them to life imprisonment. They were found guilty of the murder of Kevin Orellana, April 24, 2013. Orellana got into an argument outside Cleveland High School with these two brothers. He was playing handball when they approached him and tried bullying him off the court. He stood up for himself, but before he could do anything, one of them punched him in the face, while the other pulled out a pocket knife and stabbed him repeatedly. Witnesses reported seeing Orellana's two attackers escape in a waiting minivan driven by a young woman. During the investigation of his murder, the cops used social media and other methods to track down their getaway driver, who appeared to be a 21-year-old lady named Michelle Pineda. Pineda was suspected to be a member of their gang, but there was no concrete evidence to pin that claim on her. In the end, the Carpio brothers were found guilty and given 15 years to life imprisonment for one count of second-degree murder. The lady, on the other hand, was sentenced to 2 years in county jail after she pled no contest to one felony count of accessory. During the sentencing of these brothers, Orellana's parents sent them a letter that was read in court. As parents, we plan to dance at his wedding, celebrate a promotion, and look forward to possible grandchildren. The last thought we would have ever had is that we would have to plan his funeral. Those words meant nothing to these two, and many, just like Orellana's parents, hope they get to spend the rest of their days locked up behind bars. Number 5. Abel Gallegos.
This is the result. This is where you will end up. With your family and friends crying as you're let out of the courtroom to serve the rest of your life in prison.
In 2018, Simone Duran, a mother of 2 daughters, crossed paths with 36-year-old gang member Abel Candy Gallegos on a social media platform. Their initial online conversation eventually led to a decision to meet in person at a residence in Denver, along with another man named Rene Francisco Rosales and a few others. The reasons behind Duran's choice to meet these people remain unclear, but it turned out to be a fateful decision she would deeply regret. After spending some time together at the house, Duran, Gallegos, and Rosales left the premises, with Rosales taking a different route to his own destination. Alone with Duran, Gallegos cunningly lured her to a parking lot at W. Koufax and Kipling, where he had prearranged a meeting with another member of his gang, identified simply as Quintana. Gallegos and Quintana subjected Duran to a brutal assault, imprisoning her in the back of the car before driving her to a dark, secluded location nearby. Upon arrival, they removed her from the vehicle, mercilessly shooting her 10 times. And that's not even the end of this story. November 20th, 2018, Gallegos was apprehended for an unrelated crime, which eventually led to his connection with Duran's murder. It was also at this point that Gallegos' criminal portfolio was uncovered, involving 8 different federal probations and 6 felony convictions. His actions had earned him a reputation as a dangerous individual, and the judge, in no uncertain terms, expressed his belief that Gallegos was unfit to remain in society. As a result, the judge handed down a sentence that reflected the gravity of his crimes, a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Number 4. David Pargas.
A La Habra gang member was sentenced to 50 years to life in prison today for murdering a college student at a Halloween party back in 2006.
October 29, 2006, an African-American Cal State Fullerton student, Leland Washington, went with his friends to a Halloween house party hosted by the Westside La Abra gang. While the party was hosted by the gang, Washington and some other partygoers didn't have any gang affiliation. However, during the course of the party, a shoving match between two ladies inside that house led to this argument and altercation. Afterward, a member of the gang hosting that party, David Anthony Parga, walked up to Washington, who was standing outside of the home, not involved in this argument, and fatally shot him 4 times with a .22 caliber pistol. Apparently, Leland and his friends were sent away from the party after this altercation between the ladies. However, when everything got calm again, Washington and his friends went back in, an act which Pargas saw as being disrespectful to his gang. Now, after he shot him, Parga told Washington's friends to take him far away from the house and warned him not to call 911. On the contrary, they took Washington to the police station, just a few blocks away, where he was then taken to a hospital and pronounced dead from internal bleeding. David Parga was later arrested after a shell casing at the shooting scene had his DNA on it, and also after a female witness testified to the fact that she helped get rid of Parga's clothes stained with blood. The case went cold for several years before concrete evidence was obtained for Parga's arrest in 2010. Leland Washington was double majoring in business administration and accounting and was also a semester away from graduation. 8 years after his death, Pargas stood trial for his murder. He foolishly tried representing himself in court, but that just made things worse for him. Before handing a sentence, the judge presiding over the case called Pargas' actions a senseless and very stupid killing of a man with a promising future. And after the sentence was read out, Parga turned to Washington's mother specifically, because according to him, she showed no animosity toward him, unlike the rest of the family. Number 3. Victor Rodas. March 27, 2017. A Lynchburg teenager, Raymond Wood, was found dead in Bedford County, Virginia, U.S., and the man convicted for this crime is an alleged MS-13 gang member, Victor Rodas. On appearance, Rodas is the last person you'd ever think is capable of violence, but deep down this teenager is a humanized weapon of mass destruction, ready to kill without flinching. Sadly, Raymond Wood was one of his victims. Before the day he was murdered, Rodas engaged Wood in a conversation over social media, where he lured Wood to purchase some marijuana from him. However, it was all a trap to get him over to a secluded area and brutally murder him in cold blood. When Wood got there, he met up with Rodas and about 4 other MS-13 gang members. They put him in a car and took him to another location where they simultaneously beat the crap out of him and stabbed him 27 times with a 19-inch knife. They sliced up his hand in the process and slit his throat multiple times, with one of the members saying they all laughed as he yelled for help. Rodas was eventually arrested after he was pulled over for a traffic stop on his way back, and Wood's shoes were found in the back of his car, covered in blood. February 2019, Rodas was sentenced to 55 years of life imprisonment, 35 years for murder, 10 years for abduction, and 10 years for gang participation. When his sentence was read out by the judge, Victor had a pretty calm face and didn't seem too bothered by this. Who knows, maybe the idea of spending the rest of his days behind bars didn't seem like such a bad thing to him. Number 2. George Jal Thomas.
From the Cape Flat streets to inside prison. His trial was one of the biggest and most complex gang prosecutions in the province.
Now that's the expression on a man's face after being sentenced to 7 consecutive life terms. Surprising, isn't it? Well, maybe not so much considering that George Jal Thomas was no ordinary gangster. He was the leader of the 28s Gang, a faction of arguably the largest gang in Africa, known as the Numbers Gang. Originating in South Africa as a prison gang, the Numbers Gang later spread across the country, forming various factions. Now, the 28s were considered the backbone of this gang and were responsible for carrying out ruthless killings and executions of rival gang members. To prove their worthiness for this faction, members had to exhibit a certain level of brutality towards their victims. Failure to do so meant being relegated to the lowest tier of the gang, where they would face brutal initiation rituals until they proved their toughness. It's evident that George must have been an exceptionally brutal individual to lead such a deadly group. He and his associates took the lives of anyone who dared to cross their path. Their operations were primarily centered in Western Cape Town, the very area where George was eventually arrested on 55 charges, including 7 counts of murder. He was placed in solitary confinement, yet even in isolation, Jawald allegedly received more than 33,000 phone calls, orchestrating the execution of rival gang members. One of his intended victims was Curtis Esterhuizen. The 28s made 6 separate attempts on Curtis's life, all of which failed. Curtis was set to testify against Jawald in court, and Jawald wanted him eliminated. This was because his lawyer was trying to portray him as an upstanding citizen who earned a living by selling fish. However, the judge saw through that facade and sentenced him to 7 consecutive life terms, 1 for each first-degree murder charge against him. Nevertheless, Jawald seemed unfazed. I mean, just look at this guy's expression. And number 1, Adam Lee Hall.
Adam Lee Hall stood emotionless as that sentence was read out loud 3 times.
Now, there are some people who are just beyond evil. One such person is Adam Lee Hall, the man responsible for the brutal killing of 3 men, all in a bid to obstruct justice. His story is a very short one, but holds the most impact. Adam Lee was involved in 2 gang-related charges between 2009 and 10. A disabled man, David Glasser, was to testify against him in court for one of his pending federal cases. However, Adam had other plans. For a couple of years, he stalked, intimidated, beat, and abducted Glasser before murdering and mutilating his body. And that's just one part of the story. 2 of Glasser's friends, Edward Frampton and Robert Chadwell, were also abducted, stabbed, and decapitated simply because they had the misfortune of being there when Mr. Glasser got abducted. Adam carried out these gruesome killings back in August 2011. However, in February 2014, Adam Lee was convicted on 15 charges, including 3 counts of first-degree murder for the slayings of Glasser, Frampton, and Chadwell. Throughout the court proceedings, Adam Lee showed 0 emotion.
I mean, because there are questions that I have that only he can answer, you know what I mean? And he's not going to do that, just like he never apologized because he's not sorry for what he did.
But in the end, he was handed 3 life sentences plus 12 to 15 years on armed robbery charges from the 2009 case, followed by another 8 to 10-year sentence on a 2010 kidnapping conviction, and another 5 to 7-year term for possession of a firearm and the commission of a felony from 2010. The bottom line is, Adam Lee Hall is going to rot in jail.